The more meaningful cases, I think, for me are when I have played some small role in helping to bring justice to an innocent person.
Thank you, everybody. We're really pleased to be here at the Rocky Mountain Conference, and so glad that you could all turn out for this. I suppose it's a little risky to begin an introduction with a memory. With this one here, who can correct me on account of it's a memory of her. But why not? Because my first memory of meeting Beth Loftus was in 1982, when the two of us found ourselves alone in a huge swimming pool in a resort in Palm Springs. And being the only two human beings in this huge swimming pool, we thought, well, we might as well swim over to each other and have a chat. And it turned out that we were both hired to be the entertainment for the Merrill Lynch stockbrokers meeting at the time. We were not, of course, invited to speak to the actual stockbrokers, but to the wives of the stockbrokers. There were no husbands of stockbrokers at that time. And so we found ourselves having a conversation about this. Beth had just written a book about memory, and I'd written a book about anger, and we had a wonderful conversation about our experiences writing trade books. I didn't know when I met Beth in 1982 in that pool that she was going to go on to become one of the world's most eminent, most important scientists in the study of memory, and that she would go on to show how memory is fallible and malleable, how it can be influenced by information that happens after the event, that people can come to believe false memories with the most passionate conviction that they have toward actual memories, and of course that eyewitness testimony can be wrong. I saw it with my own eyes doesn't mean what you saw was right. Now, the fact that so many of us today accept this understanding of memory and take it for granted that this new view of memory has permeated certainly psychology, even the courts increasingly, and the public, is a testament to the importance of the work that Beth Loftus and her students and colleagues have done since 1982. They have transformed our understanding of memory. I think many people today don't realize what it was like back then, when psychodynamic views of memory were what people thought. You had a memory, the memory was worked like a tape recorder, it got in there, you know, it never got out, except with some fancy techniques. Memories were accurate. You might forget, but with a little help from hypnosis and drugs, you could get them out of there, you know. You could uproot them as if they were potatoes, but they were in there. And that was the view of memory that everyone believed. Now, Beth Loftus, of course, has won almost every honor in science that there is, and so well-deserved they are. She was a past president of the APS. She won two of the APS's highest awards, one for applications of psychology and, of course, the William James Award for her science. She is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. She has received many awards, including the Graumeyer Prize in Psychology, which honors ideas of great significance and impact. But I will tell you, as her friend and as someone who has watched her career evolve over so many years since that swimming pool, that the one honor that most touches me, and I think most touches Beth, is the one she just received from the AAAS just a couple of months ago, called the Scientific Freedom and Responsibility Award. Now, it does not often fall to scientists to have to think about these grand words, freedom and responsibility. Most scientists just want to do their work and get on with it. But every so often, a scientist comes along whose work enrages certain constituencies, who are enraged by the findings, don't believe the findings, don't want to believe the findings, or whose livelihoods are threatened by the findings, and who then find themselves under controversy, in heat. I remember once going to hear Beth speak at the University of Michigan, where security guards had to be posted at her lecture. When you endure harassment, intimidation, and lawsuits because of your science. And so the scientist then has a crucial decision. Do I persevere? Do I compromise? Do I give up? Do I keep going? Beth has never given up, and she has never backed down, and that is why I hold her in such tremendous esteem, and it's going to be one of the themes of our talk today. So, with that introduction,
Oh, gosh.
that's what I think.
Fabulous.
Okay, I think now we can all go home. Okay, now.
Spectacular. Oh, my God. And I've never heard the potato theory of memory
The
before.
potato theory of memory. It's, actually, I've been doing my own research on the potato theory. It's related to the filing cabinet theory of memory, although nobody has filing cabinets anymore. But people used to have the filing cabinet view. You know, it's in there in your filing cabinet.
Right.
If you can, all right. So let's start, if not at the beginning of your career. Your former husband and good friend, Jeff Loftus, wrote the most wonderful tribute to you in a Festschrift book about your work. And one of the things I loved is the way he described meeting you as a graduate student at Stanford, where you were voted by your fellow students as least likely to succeed in psychology. You didn't like it very much. You sat there in your math psych classes hemming skirts and writing letters. And so it seems appropriate to ask, how did you catch fire in psychology, and how did you get into memory?
Well, let's see. I did decide to go to Stanford because they had a good program in mathematical psychology. And since I had a double major in math and psychology, I thought, well, that's perfect for me. But when I actually got a close look at what mathematical psychology was, it just wasn't that interesting to me. And so I would actually hem my skirts and write letters to my relatives and who live far away. And then I ended up taking a class from a social psychologist, Jonathan Friedman, who was doing some work on memory and said, you know, maybe you'd be interested in getting involved in this work. And so it was from that experience and getting to do a study and learn how to do a study of memory from beginning to end, learn how to design the materials and run the subjects and enter the data, and I mean, start to finish. It was just exhilarating. And so I became an experimental psychologist with an interest in memory.
Was this when you were doing the study?
No. This is when I was working on semantic memory. So you know, give me the name of a bird that's yellow.
Oh, a yellow bird? That would be a canary. Okay. I didn't realize this was a question. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes. A canary. How's a canary?
Okay, good. Well, it turns out that we discovered that you are faster to give the name of a bird that's yellow than to give the name of a yellow bird. 250 milliseconds faster. Now, I was very interested in that result, but a little later I decided, you know, I'd like to be working on something that, you know, more than just a few people care about, the 250 millisecond difference. And that's when, and it was a few years after getting my PhD, I thought, you know, studying the memory of witnesses to crimes and accidents and other legally important events, that would have more obvious practical applicability. And so that's what I started to do, and that's where the A idea.
You better explain the study.
So one of the first things I was doing was looking at leading questions and how the way you word questions that you put to a witness can affect the answers people gave and can even affect their memory. And one of the earliest experiments just looked at the difference between using a definite article or indefinite article. So did you see a broken headlight versus did you see the broken headlight? And we found that people were much more likely to say they saw an object, even if it didn't exist, if you used the definite article. It insinuated that the object existed, and people were compliant with the question.
It was, I remember the first time I read about that study, it was such a remarkable, it had such remarkable impact that a word could so affect a witness's memory of what they thought they had seen. It was very powerful stuff.
Right, and there were other examples, you know, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other versus how fast were they going when they hit each other. You get different estimates of speed and a different vision of what the accident was like. And so we published a few examples of these effects, how changing just a single word could have this power. And I have since been contacted by more than a few attorneys wanting to know if there's a compilation somewhere so that they can, find
words
the words.
to use and not use, right?
Right, right.
So let's fast forward now to 1989 and the Eileen Franklin case. Eileen Franklin, who suddenly turns up in the news, this attractive young woman claiming that she had had a recovered memory of her father having murdered her best friend when she was 8 years old. This was a sensational story that hit the news and the opening salvo in the recovered memory wars. How did you get involved in that case?
Well, I got a call from an attorney in San Francisco. His name is Doug Horngrad, and he called me up. He said, I've got a murder case now. He said, I was a public defender, which means he had a lot of trial experience. I've been in private practice. I've had many murder cases before. I've never had a case like this. She claims she repressed her memory of witnessing this murder and that she repressed her memory of years and years of sexual abuse. And now her memory's back. What do you know about this? And I said, well, I've heard of the word repression. It's a kind of hand-me-down Freudian idea that, but I actually don't know what the evidence is for it. And so in conjunction with consulting on this case, I started to look for the evidence. And there is no credible scientific support for this idea. And yet here was a man being prosecuted for murder based on nothing other than this claim. He was convicted based on the daughter's testimony, bolstered by a therapist, and became virtually the first American citizen to be convicted of murder based on nothing other than a claim of repression. So that's what really got me interested in this phenomenon.
And what became of the case later? George Franklin was eventually acquitted, released, or not acquitted?
Well, he was convicted.
Yes.
He appealed through the California system. His convictions were upheld until he got into the federal system. And finally, after about 5 or 6 years, that conviction was reversed. So he is now free, but he did spend all those years in prison based on somebody's claim of a repressed memory.
I'm not sure people know how fierce the ensuing memory wars in psychology became. Lenore Terr, was she the clinician who testified in that case?
Yes.
Okay, one of her claims was that what we know about trauma is that the more often a person is traumatized, the more repetitions of the traumatic experience, the more likely it is that they will repress the memory, which on the face of it would seem preposterous since no one ever repressed the memory of the Holocaust or of being in a concentration camp for 7 years and so forth. But those claims, those clinical claims, came to anchor one end of the memory wars as against what scientists were discovering about repression and trauma. Would you tell us something about how the APA report or the effort to come out with a position paper on recovered memories and
well, that was, yes.
the growing tension between therapists and scientists?
Well, I should say that it isn't. It is therapists and scientists, but what happened with the American Psychological Association is they put together a committee of 3 clinicians and 3 researchers to study this issue and to try to come up with a consensus report. And we ended up, after several years of meetings, with 2 separate reports. Reports and then replies to the reply. And I don't think it did much to resolve the issue. And there still are these tensions, although there has been, I think, a sea change. I think people are now finally coming to see that, there really isn't any credible scientific support for these claims that are being used to prosecute innocent people or to sue them in civil court.
Well, do you find continuing belief in repressed memory? Are there continuing cases today of people claiming that they've uncovered a memory from their childhoods and so forth?
Yes. The public doesn't see it that much because the media covered it so intensely and for so long that now it has to be a really famous person being accused or a really famous person doing the accusing or a really large amount of money for it to get into the news again. But there are a smattering of these cases, and they're still clinicians who are testifying on behalf of these accusers who are trying to say that there is support for repression and that we all know repression exists.
Could you give us some examples of the kinds of charges, the kinds of memories that were turning up in these trials? Some of them were so outrageous and so preposterous on the face of it that it seemed so unlikely anybody could believe that these were actual experiences. Do you recall any of them? Would you like to give us an example?
Well, first of all, after the actress Roseanne came out in 1991 claiming that her mother had molested her when she was 6 months old and that her father joined in to commit further molestations when Roseanne was older, you started to see other people come forward and say, I was molested when I was 6 months old, and they'd produce these detailed memories of the experience. So I was involved in court cases where people were being sued or accused of having committed crimes on somebody else when the somebody was 6 months old. So we in psychology know that there is this concept of childhood amnesia, that as adults we don't have concrete, trustworthy, reliable memories for things that occurred in the first couple of years of life. And yet jurors and judges are having to listen to these claims. Then you had claims of years and years of brutalization, ostensibly banished into the unconscious by repression or some similar mechanism. Then you had these unbelievable claims of being victimized in satanic rituals, subjected to animal sacrifice and baby breeding and baby sacrifice, the works, all allegedly repressed into the unconscious. People had to sit through lengthy, expensive court proceedings based on those kinds of accusations. It was wild out there.
It was wild out there. It's true. Yes. Well, it was what we in social psychology would call a moral panic. It was a national panic. You put the word sex and children in the same sentence, and people seemed to lose their brain cells and at least their ability to think of what it was like for them when they were children or what children are like. Sexual curiosity became evidence of molestation, and so it was really tough times. I remember that when you won the APS's William James Award 10 years ago, your research was at a high point and your emotional life was at something of a low point. I think in great measure because of the Jane Doe case that was such a horrific experience for you of being sued by this young woman. I mention this because when someone like you receives awards and when it seems so obvious that your science and your awards are so worthy, I think people don't often realize the emotional price that it can take when you're at the same time being sued and your university is not supporting you. So what are your thoughts now about the Jane Doe story and how that unfolded?
Oh, gee. Well, just to remind you of a little bit of background, I had read this case history. It was a psychiatrist was putting out this case history of a woman named Jane Doe. He called her Jane Doe. I called her Jane Doe. And she had accused her mother of sexual abuse. And then, according to the psychiatrist, she repressed the memory, and then it came back 11 years later. And he captured it on videotape. So he was going around to professional meetings showing his Exhibit A, the new proof of repression. I was seeing this case history being introduced into court cases in the prosecution of people I believed were innocent. And yet, how are you going to find these people? How are you going to get to the bottom of it? It's a case history. He controls all the information. 300 million people in America. How are we going to find the Doe family? And one summer, I set out to find them, and I did. And once I found them, I enlisted the help of a colleague, poor Mel Geyer. He had no idea what was going to be coming. But in any event, he was very helpful. And we actually, once we found the accused mother, this is a mommy did it case, and she was unbelievably grateful that somebody finally believed that maybe she was innocent. We went and met her. We went through every page of the court records. And we were getting ready to write an expose of this case because we don't believe that any abuse actually happened. An expose. And Jane Doe complained to my former university. And with 15 minutes notice, they came to my office and seized my files and gagged me and put me, so I wasn't allowed to talk about the case, and put me under investigation for suspected wrongdoing.
What was the nature of her complaint? That you committed an ethical violation investigating her? What?
It started with an email complaint, one of your faculty's looking into my life and I'm upset.
Okay.
And then it morphed into, feeling her privacy was invaded. And so the university took 2 years to finally decide I did not deliberately violate human subjects regulations when I went off to meet the accused mother or to talk to other individuals. But some months after that, I was still unhappy about they didn't adequately apologize for what I had gone through and the amount of money I had to spend on my own attorneys. So I took a job at the University of California, Irvine, where I got a great job offer, was going to put this behind me, not think about Jane Doe anymore, got the expose published, put the case to rest, stop it from being used against other people. And that's when Jane Doe sued. Should I mention she sued you too?
You can. You have.
Okay.
This is what happens. You hang out with her. You just.
Oh my God! Yeah, I mean, so Mel Geyer and I wrote the expose, and we thank Carol in a footnote for her help with the article. Poor Carol.
There you are.
Be careful who you thank. In any event, so there we were, we three, sued for invasion of privacy, defamation, and other claims.
The wonderful thing is that nobody knew her name until she named herself in the lawsuit.
Right.
My privacy's been invaded. I, who was writing this for Skeptical Inquirer with you, I didn't know her name, but we invaded her privacy. There you are. So it was it's always, of course, distressing to be sued, but it was also a terribly sad, sad story of a young woman unable to give up this account of her life and to give up her memories, and that's what is indeed so devastating. And so what has become of Jane Doe today?
Well, Jane Doe, first of all, the lawsuit dragged on for maybe 4 or 5 years. It went all the way through the California Supreme Court. In the end, I managed to settle out for a nuisance fee. The other defendants, including you, went after her for their attorney's fees. Those defendants were awarded $250,000, and Jane Doe declared bankruptcy.
Let's move on to another topic that really interests me. You've been, because of this work, of course, an expert witness or a consultant in hundreds and hundreds of cases, many of them very high profile. I've just made some notes here. The Hillside Strangler, Oliver North, the officers accused in the Rodney King beating, the Menendez brothers, the Bosnian war trials in The Hague, the Oklahoma bomber, Timothy McVeigh, and litigation involving, is this impressive or what? Michael Jackson, Martha Stewart, Scooter Libby, and the Duke University lacrosse players. So of this astonishing assortment, are any of these cases something that you learned something about in particular that you'd like to share with us or tell us about?
Oh, well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, the more meaningful cases, I think, for me are when I have played some role or some small role in helping to bring justice to an innocent person. But many of those people are people you haven't heard of. But they just happen to get on the wrong side of some bizarre accusation. And if I can play some role in helping them, that's what feels really good. But I do have to say that it has been kind of interesting to meet some of these notorious people along the way. So meeting Timothy McVeigh, for example, in prison. He was in prison. This was pre-trial, and his lawyers wanted me to meet him. And I do remember walking into this little prison room where he was with a lawyer and a guard and so on, and him saying, "Tell me about yourself, Beth." And I went, whoa, I feel like Jodie Foster here, and you know.
Why?
From Hannibal Lecter. I just would, and I said, well, I study memory, and there are some interesting memory issues in your case. He was accused of renting the Ryder truck and John Doe number 2 was with him, and everyone was looking for John Doe number 2. Turns out there was no John Doe number 2. That was a memory mistake on the part of witnesses. But so I'm trying to explain to him that I'm a memory, and I said, maybe I should send you one of my books, Witness for the Defense. And he said, I don't really read books. And I said, well, this is an easy book. I said, as a matter of fact, John Gotti, USA Today published the 10 books that John Gotti had in his cell with him, and my book was one of them. And so I said, that was really good for sales. And McVeigh says to me, send me your book. I'll let people know I'm reading it. Maybe it'll help your sales. So that somebody could do what he almost certainly did and was executed for, and still have that kind of thought. It was just an interesting irony.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. But so Beth, this is very interesting because much of your work has been defending, as you say, people whom you believe to be innocent, who were falsely accused in these horrific recovered memory cases where miscarriages of justice almost certainly have happened. But do you make a distinction when someone who is almost certainly guilty calls upon your expertise as a memory scientist to come to their defense? And how, by the way, would you distinguish scientifically between taking on the case of a client who wants to use the "I just don't remember" excuse to get away with murder or other shenanigans, as opposed to they really don't remember?
Well, I mean, I think in the beginning of my career, I used to think, well, science is there for everyone. If somebody needs it and wants the scientific information to be brought into their case, that they have a right to do that, just like they have a right to an attorney or any of the other rights that we have. And so I wasn't really very much thinking about did they do it or didn't they. I was just looking to see, are there factors here, psychological factors about which there's a science and we have something to say, and if so, I'll go and say it. At this point in my career, because I have so many opportunities and so little time, I would rather be working on a case where I really feel there's a high probability that they're innocent. So I do try to make my own decision about that, and then step into the case.
Okay, let's turn now to some of the pro-social memory work that you've been doing in recent years, the Alan Alda experiment, for example. Would you please describe for us this idea of implanting beneficial memories? How would you describe this work?
Well, okay. So I had done all this work on distorting memory for events that actually did happen, and then the more recent work on planting entire memories into the minds of people for things that didn't happen. And some years ago, with my collaborators, postdoc and graduate students, we decided we wanted to look at the consequences of having a false memory. If I plant a false memory in you, does it have repercussions? Does it affect your later thinking, your later intentions, your later behavior? And we decided to do that by making people believe that they got sick eating a particular food. So at this point, I wasn't planning on doing good for the world. I just wanted to be able to plant a memory, you got sick eating a particular food, and then see if people would tell you they don't want to eat that food anymore. An example of demonstrating consequences of having a false memory. Well, we showed this with hard-boiled eggs and dill pickles. Then we did it with a fattening food. And once we did it with a fattening food, that's when I thought, you know, we could be on the brink of a dieting technique here. And I wasn't planning to go in the direction of diets, but now, if you could just plant this memory, make people believe they got sick and they avoid these fattening foods. We also showed you can plant a warm, fuzzy memory about a healthy food, and people want to eat that food more. Broccoli? It was asparagus in our, but broccoli figures into the story, but asparagus in the study. Well, why not? And it was funny because once I started to speak about this work, of course the therapists can't do this. They can't take this scientific information and run with it because they're not allowed to use deception with their patients, even if it's for their own good. But I argued to people who were interviewing me about the work, well, there's nothing to stop a parent from trying out some of these techniques on, you know, their overweight or obese teenager or child. And then the enemies, you know, they got all up in arms saying, you are recommending that parents lie to their children, you awful person. And I said, give me a break. You know, have you ever heard of Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy? You know, you do it all the time. Yeah. And so that tells you a little bit about my foray into wanting to see if you could use memory engineering to help people.
Okay, so how is that different, though, from, say, hypnosis, where a person goes to a hypnotist and says, I would like to stop smoking, or I would like to lose weight, or I would like to, whatever I would like to do, and can hypnosis help me do this? The person is going knowing that it's going to be a technique that would be beneficial. Would this be I go to a memory doctor to...
I mean, it would be a different way of doing it, and somebody would need to, you know, maybe figure out to do the clinical trial and figure out do these techniques really work, and which ones lead to longer lasting benefits, and all the basic research that needs to be done. But this involves making you believe that you had an experience or experiences that you didn't have. Hypnosis doesn't do that. It relaxes you or whatever it does. It plants a suggestion. But it doesn't claim to be planting false memories.
Well, then let's talk then about, when you say your critics, did you say critics or enemies going after you about mothers? Because it really is a very interesting question. If we have the knowledge about manipulating memory, for better and for worse, it's a tool, like all psychological tools, and can indeed be used in ways that are quite Orwellian, right? For example, I was very interested in the recent study that you did with Andrew Morgan with the U.S. military, with naval officers, I guess, in survival training. And this was to see whether you could manipulate their memories of who had interrogated them. Can you tell us a little about this? This is a really interesting study.
Well, this is a big study of these soldiers and other military personnel who are undergoing survival training. They're learning what it's going to be like if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. And as part of this grueling and stressful experience, they have a half-hour interrogation that is, at times, physically aggressive and extremely unpleasant. And later, they have to try to identify the person who conducted that interrogation. But for some of these subjects, they are given a questionnaire and a photo is shown to them. I mean, they're asked a few questions. Look at this photo of your interrogator. Did he give you anything to eat? Did he give you a blanket? Did he let you talk to other people? This is a different person. And when you do that to these soldiers and sailors and other military personnel, many of them will later identify him as the one who conducted the interrogation. So in a way, you've taken away the memory of the real perpetrator and substituted this other person with this simple manipulation. And we are now trying to publish these findings. I do have a little bit of a reservation about it because it's a recipe for educating people about how to
obliterate a memory.
Well, obliterate, yes, how to commit an atrocity, and then make your victim unable to prosecute you.
Exactly, exactly. So where do you come out on this?
Well, right now we're between rejections.
Oh.
But I feel that it's important to get the information out there and then figure out how to control it or prevent its misuse, or at least be educated so you can defend against the tactics when they're being applied to you.
Well, both sides need to be educated in this respect. I mean, if the police and interrogators want to know a method by which the suspect or victim will not be able to recall correctly what actually happened, this is powerful technique for them to use, and they may not be so inclined to use it fairly. Is this true? But it's a great concern, I think. But of course, your work has always been to educate the public and the courts wherever possible about the misuse of memory techniques, and scientific freedom and responsibility seems very crucial here. What other current research are you doing in this or related areas?
Well, my lab is full of terrific graduate students, and we're just, trying to answer some of those questions about these very rich false memories. Who is susceptible and who is more resistant to these kinds of influences, the individual differences question. Are there ways that we can tell the difference between a true memory and a false memory? I recently, with some co-authors, published a neuroimaging study, but are there other behavioral measures? It's not looking very good because the false memories are actually very vivid and real to people. We're interested in whether or not, if you are susceptible to a false memory in one classic paradigm, let's say, of false memory research, are you also susceptible in a different one? Is there kind of like a false memory gene or trait? So, I mean, these are ongoing studies, and you'll hopefully be hearing about them.
The neuroimaging, of course, nowadays neuroimaging is all the rage. If we can show where things are in the brain, then we're really doing science and so forth, which is, of course, related to the pursuit of the perfect drug. I myself am waiting for the memory drug. I'm counting on you to provide it before I get too much older, Beth. But let's talk a little bit about the drug question and the efforts to, the efforts to provide a drug that will either block the formation of a traumatic memory or that will improve memories? What do you think?
Well, there have been clinical trials now involving drugs that you could give to a trauma victim, and it supposedly dampens the memory. So these memory dampening drugs, they're really interesting, and they raise these unbelievably important questions for society. Like if people had the opportunity to take one of the drugs, would they want to? And should we have freedom of our own memory? Or do you have a responsibility to society to keep the memory so that you can go out there and testify and convict the bad guy and, make society a safer place? Just to enter this debate, I and my collaborators have recently are publishing a study on whether people would even want the drugs. And we're to my shock, because, give it to me. I don't want PTSD, and I don't care if my memory's a little damp. But my collaborators, they say, no, I don't want the drug. So we did a study of the public. And to my surprise, the vast majority of people said, no, I don't want the drug. They want that traumatic memory.
Did you specify what kind of memory we're talking about? After a car accident or after a rape?
First, we tried it, with a mugging and a beating in the park. And then I thought, well, maybe they want to be able to testify and convict the bad guy. Then we tried it with like your buddy's blown up in Afghanistan, so there's not going to really be a trial. And they still didn't want the drug. Now, this raises a question of whether or not we should force people to take the drug. We force them to get vaccinated.
Why would you force people to
because
have
you want to treat all that PTSD and the millions of dollars that the suffering for the person and the millions of dollars it costs for society? Maybe we should encourage or more that people take these drugs to prevent the kind of illnesses that when there's a strong likelihood that, it's just a question for us as a society to consider.
Well, but do not people think that their traumatic, unhappy memories are as much a part of their lives and history and who they are as their good memories?
Well, that's why people are telling us they don't want the drug, yes.
Okay. Well, you have had, God knows, unfortunately, some traumatic memories of your own. Would you want not to remember them? Would you want them gone from your mind?
Well, I guess I wouldn't mind being able to think about my mother's death with a little less emotion attached to it. I mean, I don't want to forget her altogether, but I wouldn't mind a little less emotion.
And why?
Because it's painful, and I would prefer to be happy.
All the time?
Well, most of the time.
Well, but that's the heart and soul of this. I mean, of course, what so many psychotherapists do is help people who deal with pain that they cannot get over. And I mean, what many people do, of course, is self-medicate in all kinds of ways. But it really goes to the heart of who we are, how we want to live. Do we want to obliterate pain, or do we want to learn to live with it, or do we want to get past it in personal ways rather than cutting it out of our minds? No, you're right, it's a very important philosophic as well as psychological question, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that people want to keep those memories is very touching to me, really. Okay. Well, in the sense of where you think memory research will go and its ability to help people or harm them, William Salatin in his series in Slate was very concerned about memory doctors and the future of memory doctoring. He said the memory doctors who were the psychotherapists of the 90s thought they were doing good by helping people uncover their repressed memories of traumatic abuse over all those years. They thought they were doing absolutely the best and most healthy thing. He said the danger, for psychologists who think they're doing good is that very often it backfires in ways that we'd not anticipated. I know you're aware of the criticism that he wrote you the most beautiful profile of your work in Slate. It was absolutely spectacular series. But then he ended with really this question of the potential for real harm if memory tools, if our understanding of memory, I hate to say it quite this way, gets in the wrong hands, but of course any tool can get in the wrong hands. And so do you foresee that your future work for scientific freedom and responsibility might take a different direction in preserving our liberties?
Well, you know, it's a tough choice. I mean, for me, when the critics said, I can't believe you're suggesting that parents lie to their children and make them believe, you know, they got sick eating chocolate ice cream as a kid to move them away. You know, and I say, you know, would you rather, you know, have a obese child, you know, suffering all those health consequences and a higher probability of diabetes, and or a little teeny bit of false memory a teeny bit of so you know, I really see that as a kind of very helpful bit of, you could call it memory engineering or memory restructuring or memory doctoring, whatever you want to call it. It is true. You could imagine this getting in the wrong hands, and you know, corporations figuring out ways to plant memories of people getting sick on their competitors' products or whatever. It could
They're
be
always looking, yeah.
misused, but anyhow, I'm going to leave that to somebody else to figure out. I'll just do the scientific part.
So since I ended my introduction with the AAAS Award for Freedom and Responsibility, I would love it if you would, in our final comments here, talk some about your reflections about your work and career and the legal work that you've done with so many people who have indeed been the beneficiaries of your research.
Well, yeah, that award is very special, and it has brought out, especially with a little bit of publicity given to it, it's brought out these communications from these falsely accused people, and these are the things that, you know, so they write letters of complaint to my bosses, and they try to get me fired, and they threaten my life, and they sue me, whatever. But what reminds me of why I'm doing this work are the kinds of letters I've been getting from these accused people who've lost their families or other major losses in their life, who feel that my work has given them some hope. And they're writing with such pride about that award. So I save those in my When Blue file.
When Blue file.
Yeah, When Blue.
Well, your When Blue file must be pretty huge, wouldn't you say? Beth, thank you so much for this great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Just appreciate it.